What image do you have of neo-Nazis and far-right forces? Is it the image of a protest group with white supremacy and discriminatory ideas against certain ethnic groups, where a partially armed group can turn a protest into a riot? Neo-Nazis have existed in various countries for some time, but since the Maidan Revolution in Ukraine in 2014, neo-Nazis have been on the rise in Europe. At the center of this trend are Ukrainian neo-Nazis. In the US, conversely, BLM and Antifa by far-left forces are thriving. In any case, each country is wary of these organizations to prevent them from carrying out terrorist activities, but the far-right forces in Ukraine are incomparably stronger than those in other countries. Trying to understand this conflict by downplaying or ignoring the neo-Nazis in Ukraine is a tall order. Although the media does not report them at all, the fact remains that they are one of the most important elements in the current conflict. This group is Pravi Sector. It has a seat in parliament as a political party with a neo-Nazi armed militia. Stepan Bandera, leader of the Ukrainian National Liberation Movement, fought against the Soviet Union during World War II. The current neo-Nazis in Ukraine are called Bandaists because they are dedicated to this man. The enemy of the Ukrainians is only the Russians.
The banner of the right sector harks back to a Ukrainian nationalist movement from the 1940s. They say the colours represent the blood of Ukrainians spilt upon their country's black soil. Their critics call them fascists and neo-Nazis.
We all love our country. If we love our country, we are neo-Nazis or not? I think not. So I mean that we are nationalists. Revolution wasn't finished. That's why the people who don't love Ukraine came to control Ukraine. For me, it's not normal.
Just as it did during Maidan, the right sector has played a key role in the fighting in the east. Its members are more motivated than Ukraine's conscripted regular army, and the government relies on them to bolster their strength.
Национал-социалистская тематика иногда в некоторых людях она есть проступает, как бы, чтобы была единая нация. Но не у всех это не заложено в основе этой организации, это у некоторых людей есть.
А у вас?
У меня лично есть.
В смысле? Объясните.
Мне как бы нравится эта идея единой нации. Я хочу, чтобы нация была единая, чтобы один народ, одна страна, одна нация.
А это подразумевается что?
Как бы, чтобы чистая нация. Не то, что там, как бы у Гитлера как было, но в своем роде немножко, маленько, но было, чтобы своя нация. Кому нравится Россия, пусть едут в Россию. Украина только для украинцев.
In addition to the regular army, Ukraine's law was amended in 2014 to establish paramilitary organizations under various ministries. These are militia organizations of neo-Nazi forces that were volunteer armies. The National SS under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Internal Affairs has about 46,000 soldiers and equipment roughly equivalent to that of the regular army. And Ukraine's paramilitary forces are said to number about 90,000 in all. Belonging to that National SS is the famous Azov Battalion. When it was formed, it was a battalion of about 600 soldiers, but has now expanded to the size of a regiment and is said to have about 3,000 soldiers. The battalion is said to have about 2,000 soldiers from Western countries.
To the left-wingers and liberals in the West, just having basic conservative values is enough to be classified as a Nazi. To be honest, I don't really care what my enemies call me.
Enemies is also how he sums up the entire political establishment in Ukraine. Azov has also founded its own party, officially distinct from the battalion. Right-wing parties and groups marching to the parliament building in the capital to vent their anger at the government. Azov's founder is the undisputed leader of the movement. Azov intends to unite all right-wing elements in the country, regardless of how extreme. And in parliament, which he was elected to in 2014, Bieletsky has threatened other parties.
We will summon up the courage, strength, and determination to dissolve this parliament. Take my word for it. We have gathered here to begin the fight for power.
According to the FBI, domestic terrorists killed 39 people in fiscal year 2019, making it the most deadly year for domestic terrorism since the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing.
The threat of white nationalism has evolved since Oklahoma City, where a domestic terrorist used a truck bomb to kill at least 168 people. Police don't tend to see such terrorists as lone wolves acting in isolation anymore. It's become clear to law enforcement that these attackers often have links to a global network, one with common goals and a shared ideology.
We are looking very hard at white supremacists or neo-Nazis here connecting through social media online with like-minded individuals overseas, and in some cases actually traveling overseas to train.
Over the last few years, experts in violent extremism have grown especially alarmed about the Azov movement. The group emerged from the revolution that swept across Ukraine in 2014, and it has gotten a lot stronger amid the ongoing war with pro-Russian forces in eastern Ukraine. The fighting in that region has become kind of ideal breeding ground for militias like Azov. At their public events, one thing that surprised me was how many Ukrainians tend to see Azov not as militants or extremists, but as war heroes. In Kiev, the capital, I watched an Independence Day parade where veterans of the Azov battalion marched alongside other volunteer militias, surrounded by cheering crowds, who thanked them for defending Ukraine against Russia. But even at the march, there were signs of the far-right ideology that's so common inside Azov. The symbols on their flags have been especially controversial. Azov says it combines the letters I and N for idea of nation, but extremism experts see it as an emblem of Nazism.
The official symbol of Azov, it's a version of Volksangel. It was one of the symbols of one of SS division during the World War II. It is one of more or less usual symbols for neo-Nazi groups all over the world.
And it's not just about their symbols. When it was founded in 2014, Azov drew many of its commanders and recruits from Ukraine's most notorious far-right groups, including outright neo-Nazis.
Ми відпочиваємо, але навіть відпочиваючи, ми пропагуємо наші нові українські цінності. Бути сильними і сміливими, бути єдиними і відчувати братерство своєї нації.
What worries officials in the West is Azov's recruitment strategy. It's tried hard to build friendships with far-right groups around the world, especially in the US and Europe. During my visit in 2019, I spent a day at one of the biggest recruitment events in Azov's history. Thousands of people showed up for a day of fighting sports and blatant propaganda. There were neo-Nazi symbols, tattoos, and posters all over the place. And many in the crowd seemed pretty receptive to Azov's far-right ideology.
Бути толерантним про-ЛГБТшникам – це неприродне. Для цього треба людині промити мозки. Поважати своїх батьків, любити своїх дітей, пишатися за свою країну – це нормально.
Events like this also tend to attract recruits from abroad. One of the ones I met was named Robin, who had just arrived in Ukraine from Sweden, where he told me he's wanted for hate crimes.
This is so hard to explain the surroundings for someone who's watching this, you know. It's surreal. It's like, I don't know, it's like something you read about the great Germany before, you know, in the 1920s. It's a revival of the Indo-European soul. And it's all happening here in Ukraine.
Я знаю, я вірю, я переконаний, що ми готові до боротьби, що ми готові бути сміливими і сильними, що ми готові перемагати. Бо за нами Україна, а перед нами наша остаточна велика перемога. Слава Україні! Героям слава! Слава нації! Смерть ворогам! Україна! Понад усе! Україна! Понад усе! Україна! Понад усе!
According to Ukraine's Ministry of Internal Affairs, there are 37 such battalions. It is a well-known fact that Ukrainian oligarch Ihor Kolomoisky is the financier of the Azov, Dnipro, and Aidar battalions. In 2014, Amnesty International prepared a report on alleged abuses by the Aidar battalion in the Luhansk region. It stated that some of these acts amounted to war crimes. This is part of the report. If you would like to review the original, there is a link in the summary section. Ukraine, Abuses and War Crimes by the Aidar Volunteer Battalion in the North Luhansk region. September 8, 2014. The preface states, "It's not Europe. It's a bit different. There is a war here. The law has changed, procedures have been simplified. If I choose to, I can have you arrested right now, put a bag over your head and lock you up in a cellar for 30 days on suspicion of aiding separatists." Aidar Battalion Commander to Amnesty International researcher. Members of the Aidar Territorial Defense Battalion, operating in the North Luhansk region, have been involved in widespread abuses, including abductions, unlawful detention, ill-treatment, theft, extortion, and possible executions. The Aidar Battalion is one of over 30 so-called volunteer battalions to have emerged in the wake of the conflict, which have been loosely integrated into Ukrainian security structures as they seek to retake separatist-held areas. In the course of a 2-week research mission to the region, an Amnesty International researcher interviewed dozens of victims and witnesses of the abuses, as well as local officials, army commanders and police officers in the area and representatives of the Aidar Battalion. Our findings indicate that, while formally operating under the command of the Ukrainian Security Forces Combined Headquarters in the region, members of the Aidar Battalion act with virtually no oversight or control. And local police are either unwilling or unable to address the abuses. Some of the abuses committed by members of the Aidar Battalion amount to war crimes, for which both the perpetrators and, possibly, the commanders would bear responsibility under national and international law. Amnesty International has issued a recommendation to the Ukrainian government to stop the war crimes of the volunteer army. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights has issued quarterly updates on the human rights situation in Ukraine since the beginning of the conflict. As of mid-February 2020, the estimated number of deaths from the war was approximately 13,000. The UN has confirmed that 3,353 civilians have died in the conflict by the end of March 2020. In 2019, the Norwegian Institute for Defense Studies reported that these battalions could demonstrate in the capital if they were disappointed with official Ukrainian government decisions, refused to participate in operations if they thought the operations were bad, insist on coordination rather than subordination with regard to tactical decisions, and leave the fighting at almost any time without any punishment on an individual level. In other words, each neo-Nazi volunteer battalion was not strictly under the control of the regular army, and each was likely to take its own military actions. The supreme commander of the Ukrainian government forces was, of course, President Zelensky. Its soldiers number about 209,000. However, there is much doubt as to whether he is able to control these volunteer battalions. With the strong support of the neo-Nazi-funded Kolomoisky, Zelensky won the presidential election. Even if Zelensky himself is not a neo-Nazi, this background does not mean that peace negotiations and ceasefire agreements will not be affected. Imagine that. What would happen if these neo-Nazi forces took control of nuclear facilities and biochemical research facilities? President Putin's fight against the neo-Nazis is real. And the death toll from the conflict in the Donbass region is a problem that has been internationally recognized. It is truly frightening that the media and influencers, who have made these facts as if they did not exist, have downplayed the issue and turned it into an excuse for aggression and a Russian lie. Now the media is treating the Azov regiment as heroes fighting off the Russian army.